Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today on the podcast, we have Eric Partyka, and Eric works at Standard Solar, and he's the Director of Business Development. Hey, Eric, welcome to the podcast, and how are you doing today directing all that business development for Standard?
Hey, Sean, doing great. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Great, yeah. What's Standard Solar up to? What does Standard Solar do for people that don't know?
Standard Solar is a commercial development company that we own and operate solar projects, typically in the 1 to 5 megawatt size range. We do both power purchase agreement behind the meter projects, and we do community solar projects around the country in over 20 states.
Like, I know that Standard Oil? When I went to bed last night, Standard Oil was like an oil company. And then I think I woke up this morning and now the world has changed and I'm not sure which reality I woke up in. But now I guess we have Standard Solar. It's the big company that the world needs to look out for, something like that.
I wouldn't go that far. We definitely would like to think of ourselves as dominating the commercial market, but we're no monopoly by any stretch. There's a lot of competitors doing what we do out in the world. So we're definitely not a monopoly.
Okay, darn. I was just hoping that I woke up in some reality where, is there still oil in the world? Do people worry about all that stuff? I guess I just woke up in the world that I went to bed in. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it didn't change that much. Incremental changes along the way.
Now, it wasn't an overnight thing, but I'm sure probably in 10 years, it'll be kind of normal. And then we'll be going like, yeah, do you remember, when we used to do oil and all that kind of stuff? And right. I feel sorry for those people that have those cars you can't buy oil for, and you can't buy gasoline for them or anything like that. So you like to keep it at between 1 megawatt and 5 megawatts. So is that because you have a really big house that needs a whole megawatt? Because you're like a standard billionaire, something like that?
No, I feel that even in behind the meter projects, there's typically are limits on how big, the state will, whatever state you're in has some limits on how big your project can be before it enters into sort of a more utility scale type regulatory environment. And also most of the community solar projects around the country have a 5 megawatt AC limit. And most of the projects we're doing are community solar. And I'm happy to talk about what the concept of community solar is. But in other words, the states say, hey, we really want to see solar, but we don't want it too big. And if it's really big, then it's going to go into a different regulatory regime. And we tend to stay more in the commercial, I won't say smaller, but in the, like I said, like 1 to 5 megawatt type size. We do bigger projects as well, but I would just say that's kind of where the industry's at in the sort of community solar world. And behind the meter projects tend to be on the smaller side because the site would limit you to how much you can build, right? So as opposed to utility scale, or maybe getting into the solar baseball here, but you've got residential, you have utility scale, which tends to be 100 megawatts or more, and then commercial, where we play, we're more in, like I said, the 1 to 5, 1 to 10 megawatt range for most of the projects we do.
Okay. And maybe just for some people that are learning about solar, we can explain what community solar is.
So community solar allows you to build a project typically in a given utility territory, and people who live or own businesses are able to buy energy, I would say virtually, from that project without it being necessarily attached to their home or business. So you can literally buy the energy that the project is making. Many states, I would say definitely more than 10 states in America, if not more, have a community solar program that allows this. If there's no allowance for that, you can't simply put solar in a field and then let people buy it without some regulatory or some power purchase agreement. So community solar is, again, a state program that allows both residential homeowners, renters, small businesses. They typically will also encourage us to have low income subscribers and provide discounts to those folks or any folks for their cost of energy. So it usually provides a savings benefit to the customer. So, and we're typically connecting on the distribution line versus transmission level, right? We're really, again, a DG style projects that are supported by the state community solar programs. So, yes.
Great. Yeah. So DG, distributed generation, and then community solar, I guess, is something that you make a project and then you get subscribers that can participate in that project. And so instead of having solar on your roof because you don't have a roof maybe, A lot of people don't have roofs, they're living on the first floor or something like that. And so you can use the community solar project.
It's exactly right. Subscriber is the very operative word that you brought up. And it's like you said, if you're renting in an apartment building, you could buy your energy from that, where customers may have choices of types of energy they can buy or where they buy from. Even I would even say small businesses, right, that want to buy solar energy, they can typically participate in community solar programs to get their electricity from those projects. So they know that it's green energy. And like I said, it's usually very competitive in terms of what the ratepayers, what they're paying for that electricity for those projects.
Well, don't you think that only rich people should be able to participate in solar? So it sounds like community solar would also let poor people participate in solar. And don't you believe in trickle down economics and that rich people should have all the money and then poor people should just, live off of whatever is left over from all the rich people, and they can like fuel their private jets and stuff like that? And so it seems like you're helping out even people that don't own homes. I mean, that's kind of a weird concept.
Isn't it though? I feel like solar is one of these democratizing technologies that you can make the energy where you live or close to where you are, versus moving these electrons hundreds or thousands of miles from a central power plant across massive transmission lines, right? And so I feel like it is actually counter to what you're suggesting, in that it allows people to get energy, right? It's just an electron at some level. People don't know whether it's from a coal plant or a nuclear power plant or a solar plant, right? But we know that it's clean energy from the sun. It's renewable. We're not burning fossil fuels to get this electricity to your home. And we're making electricity when the sun is shining. When costs for air conditioning go up, we have a good connection there. So we feel that it's a very economically leveling technology, especially because it can be made close to where people live in their communities rather than hundreds or thousands of miles away. So I would say the technology is agnostic about who can buy it, but we feel like we are competitive, and there's always been this, not always, but there have been a struggle where in the past maybe solar was a little expensive or it was a premium product, like you might say, that only rich people could have it on their homes. But now I feel it has become very competitive with all the other technologies in terms of its levelized costs of energy. And so any basic person or ratepayer or business can find an economic advantage by buying this energy from us. And we typically provide a fixed cost so they can see into the future and say they know what their electricity costs are going to be. When you're buying electricity from utilities, you don't know from one year to the next what the rates are going to do. And solar definitely provides a lot of certainty around the long-term cost as well, that I think all people enjoy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you go back long enough, only people that were landowners could vote. And then this world is just falling apart. So community solar.
I think there's a lot of people who agree with you. They're trying to go back to those days.
All right. So Standard Solar doing community solar, and you were saying like community solar is a state thing. And so we don't have a federal law for community solar. It kind of would be nice if it was across all state lines. And why don't we have all of the states doing community solar? Who's against it? Are the non-community people or the people that are trying to go back to the days where only landowners could vote? Maybe those people are against community solar.
I think that's a deep topic area. I think you have to go back to the 90s and talk about deregulation a little bit.
That's the 1890s?
Yeah, in the 1990s, there was a movement by a lot of the utilities and the power producers to deregulate the industry. And I would say in a lot of those states where they successfully deregulated, where essentially they decoupled. So in the old times, talk about monopolies, utilities would own all the wires and the power generation. But in the 90s, they moved to sell off their generational assets and let generators compete to sell energy. And you ended up with some deregulated markets, particularly in the Northeast, in the mid-Atlantic states. A lot of the southern states did not go down this road. So they're basically have maintained this vertically integrated system of Florida or Alabama or Georgia or wherever in the South. You really won't see a lot of community solar because there aren't competitors coming in and selling energy. The utilities are owning all the resources. Conversely, in the northeastern states where you have deregulation, folks can come in and compete and sell energy on a third-party basis. And that's where you've seen a lot of the community solar. But in fact, the first states to embrace community solar were, I think, Colorado and Minnesota. to have these programs. And so the utilities can thrive and it coexist with third parties selling energy in these regimes. And that's where we're seeing, huge amounts of community solar in states like Colorado and Minnesota to start. But even a state like Maine, that you would never think is a big solar state, has a ton of community solar, and we're participating in that market a lot. So it's really, like you said, a very state-driven, Federalist Society kind of discussion about, well, why doesn't the federal government do this or that? And power generation and the utilities have been a state-level regulatory place. And the last thing I'll say is you have independent system operator markets like PJM or MISO or ERCOT in Texas, right, where power can be sold and traded through these states in another fashion that has also allowed or fostered the development of solar in those markets that have sophisticated independent system operators as well. So back to your point, though, the states have really been the driver for community solar.
Yeah, and so you were saying that vertically integrated states don't like community solar. So if we had to go from 3 dimensions back to 2, we should keep horizontal and get rid of vertical.
Right. I think that's my earlier point about the deregulation, is that the South, a lot of the southern states just didn't embrace deregulation. And so therefore they don't have the opening for third party energy develop, whether it's natural gas or solar or whatever. Folks coming in and trying to do that is not, those markets really aren't open to that. So I feel like deregulation helped foster community solar when the states did that. And I'm sure that wasn't necessarily their intention. It has really, I think, provided the bedrock for community solar in states where the utilities are deregulated. I can't really speak to the viewpoint. I feel that the democratization that you spoke of, right, is kind of a feature, right, that if you allow people to put solar on their homes or buy from third party, it makes a democratic function of getting your energy and controlling that, right? They take control of that very important resource in your life. And some states really make it hard to do, and others really foster it.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's Solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. And so what states are good for community solar, and also what's happening in, the bigger states? So like right now, probably the bigger states for solar would be like California, Texas, and even Florida is kind of moved up a lot.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think hands down right now, the most popular community solar state is Illinois. We're seeing a lot of projects being developed in that state. And it bounces around here and there. I'd say like Minnesota, Colorado, like I said, were the leaders. But New York has a very strong community solar program. Maryland, Delaware, Virginia now has started to really embrace it. Maine, I mentioned earlier. Oregon has community solar. I don't want to get too deep in this. Texas doesn't have community solar, but it's one of the leading states, I think, because there's so many utility scale projects being developed there. It's such a big state. It has a lot of solar, but they don't have a community solar program per se. It's a solar friendly state for sure, but it just hasn't gone down that road. And California has a limited community solar program that's kind of county driven. So some counties will have a CCA type program and some don't, but they really haven't taken up community solar the way like a Colorado or Illinois has. Really made it a strong program at a state level.
Yeah, and so that's too bad that all the states aren't doing it, because that's your business, and I want you to have more business. We're going to change governors in California pretty soon. Do you know if any of the gubernatorial candidates support community solar?
I don't know. That's a great question. I haven't followed it closely there. We work with a group called CCSA that advocates for community solar in almost all the states. And I'll give you, just not to go off California, but like Ohio and Pennsylvania, states that don't currently have it will typically have legislation pending each year. And for whatever reason, it doesn't come through. So I really don't know what the status of California's community solar program is right now, or if there's any pending legislation. I can certainly look into that and get back to you.
So would you consider community solar sort of like what some people used to call virtual net metering? Like it's sort of like you have a
Mhm.
project over here and then like not too far away, there's somebody using that electricity and it's calculated sort of like net metering, like you had it on your roof, sort of. Like on a sunny day, you get more electricity.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'll just say here in Maryland, we have aggregate net metering where we allow only like a very limited basis, but like a nonprofit has to buy that electricity where we might make it somewhere in the same utility territory Pennsylvania has. What you did describe like a virtual net metering program, but the solar project has to be within 2 miles away of the user, right? So they have these sort of limiting things. But when a state has a really robust community solar program, they're typically coming in saying you should have a minimum of low income subscribers. They may even dictate a discount to those subscribers. There's more of a regulatory environment for what's happening. There's awards, there's RFPs, there's processes, there's bonding, right? There's a lot of making sure this is done right at the state level. One state I neglected to mention that we're doing a lot in is New Mexico. Really jumped into community solar in a big way. We're doing a ribbon cutting out there next week at one of our projects. We're super proud of New Mexico for its community solar program. They have a second phase coming out. So all I'm saying is that, yes, it's very similar to virtual net metering, but I have to say community solar typically has a very robust regulatory, and maybe that's not the right word, but has a sort of a subscriber mandate about who can buy the energy and the rates that they pay for that. So yeah, it's a good protection for everyone.
So I think sometimes with community solar, there's a waiting list. Do you have different waiting lists? And if you do, how do people get on them? So like, somebody doesn't have solar on their roof, they live in an apartment or something like that, and they're in one of your areas and they want to get on, and is it all booked or do you have waiting lists?
Both. Yeah. I think there's some projects that need subscribers and there's projects that are waitlisted where you're waiting for someone to move to get on. And to jump one step ahead of you, Sean, we work with a lot of aggregators. Some of them are name brand companies like Arcadia, Solstice, Neighborhood Sun, and Common that will work with us to find these subscribers. So typically you're able to go to them and say, hey, do you have any projects in my area? And then they'll say, oh, yes, there's one to turn on next year. Would you like to sign up? Or we've got a waiting list. Would you like to be on it? And that's really a very practical vehicle for people to get in and acquire this energy for their homes, businesses.
So how do people sign up?
There's usually a short agreement. They find this subscriber in their area. Like I said, I mentioned a few of the names. If you Google like community solar aggregator or subscription company and look for projects in your area, and you go on their website and you can sign up. It's typically like a one-page agreement to say, I agree to buy this energy. You typically can get out of it if you're moving or any kind of thing happens in your life. So there's some commitment, but that's not a huge commitment, but you're signing up to buy that energy.
Today's podcast was brought to you by global warming. Just think, beachfront property in the Himalayas.
Let's see, is there anything else you want to cover today, Eric?
Just really want to highlight that we really take pride in being a long-term owner of these projects. We're not just making some investment or trying to sell energy. These projects typically last, 35 years. So the long-term ownership piece, I think, is essential to the performance and what the benefits that the ratepayer, a customer, subscriber would get.
Well, I do like communities and I don't like monopolies as much. I was just kind of joking around at the beginning, and I wish you a lot of success, and I wish Standard Solar a lot of success. And I'd like to thank you for being on the podcast, Eric Partyka, and you're invited to come back and we could talk more about this. And it's been a great conversation talking to you. And how do people get a hold of you or find Standard Solar?
My email is eric.partyka, Partyka, @standardsolar.com. Feel free to reach out to me. And Sean, thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed your commentary and your sense of humor. So I'd love to come back whenever it makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and I apologize for California for not having a better community solar program. I'm going to get that changed right away. So thanks so much, Eric. Have a great day.